of pays to private bankers. Well, let's get in a word from our guests now. And let me start with you, Mr. Diwanji. Of course, you did hear the governor there. Do you believe that the RBI is trying to play safe somewhere here, coming up with these guidelines? Because if tomorrow something does go wrong with the Indian banking sector, no one can really point fingers at them for really allowing bankers to be overcompensated.
Yeah, fundamentally, I don't think there's a problem in having a policy in place. And I think it's good to have the policy much before a crisis like that hits India, which it has not. And frankly, our financial markets are such that it's not likely to. But more importantly, I think it's important that a policy does come about. And I think that's what the RBI has aimed to do, which is not a bad thing in principle. I think just to address even George's point, I think what they have in a subtle way kind of accepted that by keeping the PSU banks out of these guidelines is that the salaries are low enough anyway. So they don't need these guidelines in that sense. So I think, yes, there is an anomaly that the RBI needs to tackle separately, which is on the PSU bank side. But I do believe fundamentally that guidelines are required to be in place. The issue, of course, is that these guidelines fundamentally have to be focusing on 2 or 3 important points. And one of them ideally should be that you should encourage risk-taking in a balanced manner, where risk can also be managed. It should not be that it discourages taking of risk. So there should be some ideal guideline which says that you need to make sure that people take risks and they get. Second important thing is, I think we should look for compensations beyond 1 year. We are fixated to a 1-year compensation or a 3-year compensation through an ESOP scheme, as the RBI guidelines say. I think we should look at sustained performances, and pay scales need to be linked to sustainability. So if somebody creates long-term value over 5 to 7 years, there needs to be compensation for it. And in India, frankly, if you design ESOP type structures, it also means it's also a retention tool. It also means that people need to be in the organization to avail of those benefits. So we need to get away from that mindset to say even if somebody does not stay in the organization, but actually ends up creating value, he needs to be paid the dividends. It's a bit of a reverse to the clawback structure that we're talking about, which basically says that there will be a clawback if you do not achieve performance within those 3 to 5 years. I'm saying that if you do achieve performance beyond those 3 to 5 years, and if your ESOP scheme extends to that, then you should be getting the benefit even if you are not in the firm. So we need to make a distinction between a retention tool and a compensation tool.
Okay, hold on to that thought, sir. Let me get in a word from Mr. Mehra, because, you know, coming from an executive recruitment firm background, the argument really, Mr. Mehra, that the banking sector pays better than the corporate sector held true for a few years ago. But today, of course, the corporate sector pays well, if not better. So do you believe the draft guidelines really, if put into practice, does have the potential of driving away talent to any of these other sectors?
No, I don't think that the draft guidelines are so draconian. In fact, carrying forward with Abizer's point that if you look at, if you drill down on what the RBI is actually trying to say, a lot of things that they are saying are very fair. Of course, we can always make an argument that, look, in a country like India, when the salaries in any case are not that high to begin with, when you compare it to international salaries, is some kind of a guideline like this actually required? But from a policy level, if we are to protect ourselves from any potential damage that can take place in the future, then the policy is definitely good. And if you look at what the RBI is really trying to say, I would say that just keeping aside one aspect, which is 10 to 15% cap on salary growth, if you leave that apart, pretty much everything else that they are saying is extremely pragmatic. If you look at the salary cap, when people read in the press that yes, now we are talking about a cap on salaries, how does that mean? How does that sort of translate into a free economy? I would definitely say that salary cap has to, if one thinks about a salary cap, or that you propose that salary should be between 10 and 15%, it has to be linked to the performance of the bank. If the bank is having a performance that is 30% per annum growth on profit, 50% per annum growth on profit, obviously at a certain point in time, your salary is going to look very small in comparison to the size of the bank. At that point in time, your CEO is obviously going to be vulnerable from the perspective of being headhunted by the next big bank that's going to be out there, or the next organization that might want to headhunt the individual.
Right.
So leaving that apart, I think other suggestions that they have made are extremely pragmatic. I mean, you make sure that there is a kind of a linkage to performance, whether it's through ESOPs, a 3-year plan, and they have not said that the sign-on bonus is something that they completely disagree with. What they have said is that it should be limited to the first year.
Right.
Right. Now, so Sunit, you make a very valid point, but the point is, and let me take this to Abizer. Sunit did talk about the need to not cap increments at the 15% level, especially given the fact that if your bank is growing at 30% or 40%, which most of the better banks are growing at, that's the rate at which they're growing at. So that's one concern. The guaranteed bonus payable only in the first year, that is another concern. Again, bonuses to be paid only in ESOPs. Now, there are a number of points that the RBI has brought out, a number of them on which we can argue endlessly about. But the moot point here, Abizer, is did we need these guidelines in the first place? Because if you look at all banks in the private sector, if you choose only to focus at them because public sector banks aren't the concern right now, nowhere is a CEO or senior management level person overcompensated. If you just take the example of HDFC Bank, the CEO's salary is under 2 crores, his fixed component, his ESOPs, what he holds is worth just about 65 crore rupees. Now when you compare that to the performance that the bank has put out, it would look like he's being undercompensated. So why these guidelines in the first place?
See, we have, I think what the RBI is aiming to do, George, is just trying to put some kind of a system in place where things can be monitored if things go out of hand. I mean, if the West realized it after the crisis happened, I think the RBI is trying to say it should be realized it before the crisis happens. So I don't think having a policy in itself is a bad measure. I think the point that Sumit made rightly also is that the fact that you will soon outgrow the compensation because the banks in India are performing higher. I think those are issues which needs to be tackled on a more upfront basis. Again, the fixed compensation I think can be lower. The variable component, I think they're saying that you have a substantial variable component, and as the fixed compensation keeps reducing, the variable component will keep going up. So what we will find is that variable component will be deferred over how enterprises create value. So take the example of an HDFC. If over 10 years the bank has grown 10x, then ideally the CEO should get 10x return on the equity that he's earned over a period of time, which is very logical, and the RBI guidelines allow it.
Right.
So from that perspective, I don't think the policy framework is incorrect.
Okay, so varying views there coming out from both our guests. Mr. Mehra saying that some of those guidelines look pragmatic. Many thanks, gentlemen, for joining us on the show with your views, and George as well. Thanks for bringing in that perspective on this very interesting debate. Let's shift focus back to equities.